writers, welcome to part 2 of my crash course into creating and analyzing disabled media representation, which I definitely did not film on the same day as the part 1 and just put a jacket on to make you think it's a different day. That would be absurd. Now in the last video, which you can watch up here, we talked about the stereotypes and narratives we see over and over again in representation. Today we're going to talk about the intention versus the impact, how audiences consume that media, and how to make your media about disabled people accessible to said disabled people, because people always forget about that. Like, they'll just make media about us and then they'll forget the whole making it so that we can actually partake. Anyway, much like I said in my last video, there is no perfect way to represent a minority, especially one that makes up, 20% of the population. You will always fall into some sort of stereotypes and somebody's always going to criticize it. This is not to scare you out of writing a disabled character, and it's also not to tell you what to do. It's just kind of an overview of some things to ponder and to reflect upon as you create your character to help give it some of the je ne sais quoi, the dimension that it needs, and also make you fully aware of what you're doing and how your work fits into the existing canon of disabled representation. So basically what I am saying is to you young writers out there, do not panic. You're welcome to throw all of this information out the window if you so desire, but at least you're going to know what you're throwing out the window, and so you're going to do it with intention, and that's what's important. Also, if you don't know who I am and are like, why am I qualified to be doing this? Hi, my name is Sydney. I use they, them pronouns. This is the same speech I gave in the last video. I am working on an undergrad thesis that is a master's thesis level of research, but I am getting an undergrad for it, on disabled media representation, accessible education, disabled theater history and education, all leading up to directing and playing Christopher in the world's first all-neurodivergent cast and crew production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This thesis has thus far involved around 75 books and also like 50 hours extra of research from like anywhere and everywhere that I could find things, and interviewing with people. So I'm very qualified to be talking about this topic. I'm also currently writing for a show about disability, and this series initially began as a crash course for my production team. Just so you're aware. Also, image description for those who need it. Hi, I'm a white person in my early 20s with light brown curly hair that is shoulder length. I am wearing a dark blue shirt with a black bomber jacket on top of it and round glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf. There we go. So let's start by talking about intentions. Why are you creating or portraying a disabled character? Are you intending to center disabled voices and tell a disabled story that hasn't been heard before? Or are you just putting it there to put it there? And that's not me attacking you, being like, hey, why are you making this choice? That's a bad choice. It's just for you to reflect upon why you're doing something and how you intend to go about it and what your goal is in doing so that you can do it authentic to that goal. And yeah, because the thing about disability representation is that we are not lacking in it. In fact, there's too much. But we are lacking in good and authentic and three-dimensional authentic. I already said authentic. Three-dimensional disabled representation. So we want more of that. So if you're going to create it, please seek to at least do that much. So if you're planning to throw in a disabled character just to say that you threw one in, that's not helpful to anyone. We have way too much of that. Not saying that disabled people can't just be people who happen to be disabled, but there is a very fine line to walk between most disabled people do have their disability as a part of their life and how they see the world on some level. Like, sure, we can exist without having our entire personality be our disability, obviously. Frankly, we need to, but it would also be really weird to mention that one of the characters in this story is in a wheelchair and then not, think about how that might affect their interactions with people, or how that might make it harder for them to find a seat in the cafeteria, for example. Or for me, I have chronic migraines, and so my whole life is slightly altered just because I need to make sure I'm eating meals on time and stuff like that. And those things, sure, you can ignore them because they're not a visible disability, but they do affect how I live my life, and it is an important part of how I go about my day. Just things to keep in mind. And one of the books that I read specifically posed this question as, how do we see characters' differences without dialectically quarantining them in the narrative? And that sentence just repeats in my head very, very frequently. I'm also asked pretty frequently in messages and whatnot if it's okay for non-disabled people to create disabled characters. Yes, please do it. I'm not going to go into all of the nuances of that conversation right here, right now, because we've already talked about it. I will point you toward the video on Mark Haddon that I made. He's the writer of Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. It's a really great discussion of that, but short version, please write about us. Just do it with intention. Now that we've got the intention bit figured out, let's talk about perception. There are a lot of pitfalls that we often fall into in the realm of audience perception. You can create something that's perfect and then the audience perceives it weirdly, and you don't even realize that that's going to happen. So you got to keep those in mind as you're creating. And I never really thought about that before. For example, art including or made by disabled people is often seen through the lens of arts as therapy or some sort of enrichment occupation for people in a group home, and it's not taken seriously. And this is why people think that disabled people can't make really cool art. But then we also have the tortured artist trope. So that's a discussion for another day. Working on that video, that's taking way more time than expected. But obviously disabled people are allowed to make art for fun. We're allowed to make bad art. Everybody's allowed to make bad art, but that should not be the only option or the only perception of our capabilities. It is also very common for people to forget that disabled people are capable of performance. Shocking. People often forget that disabled actors are acting or performing, and this originates from Perceptions of the Freak Show. You can learn about that up here. Honestly, I think that this phenomenon is something that would be really cool to play with in an art piece. I haven't quite figured out how to go about that yet, but it is also something to ponder. You, as the creator, have the ability to make the spectators think about this prejudice and subsequently reflect on how they see disabled people on stage and in real life, and I think that's really cool. There's also the 5 aesthetics of learning/intellectual disability theater, which I find apply to any disabled art and made me reflect not only on the consumption of art but also my creation of it as well. To quote my book, each has a deductive potential or aesthetic appeal. Each has also flaws and limitations. The solution actively seek to maintain all of these willfully, deliberately, and simultaneously. Basically, people see disabled performers and artists in one of 5 ways, or all of the above at the same time, which is more common. 1, looking at us as no different from other people. 2, looking at us in particular because they find us more interesting because we are different from other people. 3, looking at us to see similarities between disabled and non-disabled people. 4, looking at us because we're more real and authentic than non-disabled performers. Usually ties into the idea of forgetting that we're capable of performance, so they just think that we're just existing. And 5, looking at us because they're interested in new styles of performance to learn from. And we hope that the majority of the time it would be just the 5th one, but that's not the case. It's almost always a combination of all of the above. And again, those are things to play with and think about. And I feel like this video is a very disjointed mess of random notes that connected in my brain, and then I started writing it, and then they disconnected. I hate when I make listy videos because they just don't feel as... I like making narratives out of things, but I'm gonna get over myself. It's happening and we're doing it, yay, woohoo. I wrote down tone on my list as something else to talk about. We kind of spoke about that in the last video, but you basically need to balance between the tough stuff and the positive stuff. I think especially narratives of institutionalization tend to stay all the way heavy sometimes, and that's not interesting or compelling or whatever because people just get fatigued from that. And a big portion of that to keep in mind is that disabled people often come to disabled artists to see art made about themselves. And while we also have hurt to share and we have things that we need to say and we want to experience that through other people in our community, reminding everybody of all of our hurt and pain and nightmare all of the time, including our disabled audience who would be triggered by that, is exhausting and triggering to everybody involved. And that also kind of ties into mental health. We don't have the, I don't have the emotional capacity to talk about how to write mental health right now. And also, there's a really, really amazing video essay about it that does a way better job than I ever could. So I'm just gonna link that in the description for you and you can check it out. It's a masterpiece. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, the last group of things that I wrote down on my list is accessibility and the reality of making disabled art. For example, a big reason, other than like basic ethics, to make sure that you're casting disabled people in disabled roles is that non-disabled people playing disability typically spend most of their time learning to play mannerisms rather than the character behind those mannerisms, and it never looks good, and it never looks natural, and nobody likes it. They pretend they like it because they're like, wow, that was a good job acting, but there's so much more heart and energy and character into a role, a disabled role that a disabled person plays, because disability is second nature to us, so we don't need to study that bit. So you're gonna get a much better performance, and also like ethically hire us for things that why is this a thing that we still have to talk about? I don't understand. But anyway, moving on. When it comes to accessibility in the workplace and how to be an ally for your disabled peers, I have so many resources for you. I think I've run out of cards I can link for you above, but I will for sure link it in the description for you. Hey. It's also important to mention that inclusion and integration are not the same thing, and you really need to know which one of these two that you are going for. Hopefully integration, but it is harder, so there's that, when trying to make your space accessible. Inclusion is adding people into the system as the system lies. Integration is changing the system to be equally accessible to all needs. And if you are creating a production or a film about disabled people, the biggest things that bother me, because they're an easy accessibility fix, is things that are always way too loud, and people have a weird love affair with strobe lights and flashing lights for some godforsaken reason, despite them being horrible on every single level, and excessive camera movement can be a serious migraine, epilepsy, and meltdown trigger for people. Very easy to fix those things, does not ruin your art permanently, and it means a whole 20% of the population can actually enjoy it sensory nice nicely. And I know that many theaters do relax performances for disabled people to be able to go and come in for a special performance or a screening where everything is taken down a sensory notch. These are also very often not accessible for many disabled people. That's also a video that is coming sometime soon. It takes very minimal effort to change these like 3 things, and they help everybody to some degree, so you should just do them. It's not hard, and it's not hard. Now, by the end of the day, you're not gonna get it all perfect, and the thing is like, even if you get enough of it perfect and if it feels authentic, we're going to be way more willing to forgive the imperfectness of it all. Not saying you shouldn't try to be perfect, but I'm saying that we are so used to seeing crip-faced inspiration Korn from a caretaker's perspective that if we see an even vaguely real story played by a real autistic person who speaks like a real autistic person and feels authentic, even if it may have a handful of issues here and there, we're going to love it. And also, like, there's no such thing as perfection. We already talked about that. But disabled people, we know on some level that these narratives are real in the world. We know that on some level, inspiration, Korn, is going to appear by accident, or that a character is going to be perceived as a villain or a cheater because it's honest, and it happens in real life too. I know some terrible disabled people. We do exist. We're just not the majority. And do we want more narratives than those? Absolutely, and 100%. We need those. But also, you cannot erase every single narrative like that either, because they also happen in a lot of life, and a lot of stories we tell about disabled people are based on true stories, and you can't just change the true story to fit a political, like, that, no. You just need to be aware of all these pitfalls and to tread very lightly when you do so. Because if the characters are 3-dimensional and they're treated like human beings, regardless of ability or disability, and if you don't treat the disabled character like they're, I don't know, a burden or solely a source of inspiration, we're going to be much more likely to see ourselves in that character, to feel incredibly happy that we finally get to feel that in a character, and to look at flaws and go, that's life, and just accept it as is. What's important here is to know that by opposing stereotypes, you often reinforce them. So rather than trying to directly oppose or reinforce stereotypes, just try to write something truthful with authentic intention. I know that it's very easy to sit and look at a blank Google Doc and think, I'm never going to be able to do this right. Why even try? While knowing that I have the skills and knowledge to write or create that thing better than many other people could, I even get stuck. I just get too scared to do something wrong, and I get too in my head and I freeze up. So here's your reminder that nothing will ever be perfectly perfect. That doesn't exist. Also, things can get edited later. That's why having disabled people in your team is important. And whatever happens, just start writing. The fact that you did enough research to find and watch this video is a really huge step, and hopefully it was a good start for you and sent you off in some directions that'll help and give you some things to think about. And I wish you much luck in your endeavors as a writer or director or any other kind of creator, or anybody else who just watched this video for funsies and they like to, I don't know, judge media like I do. Also, if you wanna, I forgot to write this in my script, but a lot of learning what works and what doesn't work with disability representation is just consuming a lot of it. Hence why I'm qualified to be talking about this, because I watch like 10 things a month for this. I have a link, no, I don't have any cards left probably. I'll link in the description, but I do reviews twice a week that are short reviews of films, and I talk about the tropes in them and stuff like that. So you can check those out. You can then watch those films and learn from them as well. Those helped me a lot to make my art better. So yeah, I feel like this video was all over the place, but hopefully you learned something, or it was like vaguely helpful in some manner. Maybe. But anyway, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over. I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.